This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 183 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. We are tackling a big issue today. It's a question that's been bothering me for a while, and it's all about justifying travel in the climate change era. It's a question that seems to have come up for me more and more of late. It's a topic I actually already put on my podcast wish list last year, but now in 2020 it seems kind of even more important. You know, we've had our bushfire season, a terrible bushfire season here in Australia, which, you know, provoked lots of questions about climate change. And now we're all stuck at home during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think we're really starting to think, can we still justify travelling? You know, the more we know about the impact travel has on the world, can we justify it? And of course, I want to say yes. I've got lots of reasons, but I didn't want it to be just my reasons. So I'm really lucky today to have two truly incredible guests to chat about this topic. I've got Catherine Marshall and Louise Southerden, who, just by the by, are also two of Australia's most awarded travel journalists, as well as being lovely, awesome people. Now, these two women, they travel much more than I do, and I knew they would have given this question some serious thought, and they have also been honest enough to tell me that they actually have no idea what the answer is. So, I can't wait to share these conversations with you all. So I think, of course, we want to justify travel because we all love doing it so much. I doubt you'd be listening to the Thoughtful Travel Podcast if you didn't want to keep traveling, and we just can't imagine life without it. I certainly can't. And I do genuinely think there are lots and lots of different reasons why travel is really important for us. And Lou and Catherine very eloquently share a lot of these reasons. So we don't have the answer exactly to can we justify travel, but we want to justify it. Let's summarize it that way. So my first chat is with Lou Southerden, and we chatted earlier this year before coronavirus was a big topic when we recorded this. In fact, it felt like it must be months ago because it wasn't, you know, part of our conversation, but I checked, it was actually only 6 weeks ago. So things change fast. But in any case, this is what Lou and I had to say about justifying travel in the climate change era.
I think I'm still figuring out. I think that obviously travel does have many benefits, but perhaps the type of travel we do is the thing we have to think about. And I think we probably can't justify all kinds of travel in the era of climate change. And perhaps we can't justify traveling as often as we have been, or as perhaps we can't justify flying long haul more than once a year in this era. I think what it comes down to, from my point of view, I think what it comes down to is each person has to make their own decision based on their own values and obviously their own lifestyle. And, it's a really tricky one because none of us wants to make rules for other people. Personally, I have been for a couple of years cutting back on my travel, which is difficult because I'm a professional travel writer and that's how I make my living.
Yeah, so it is pretty important for you to travel.
It is really important. And I know also on a personal level how much travel has enhanced my life and made me who I am and made me care about the world in a way that I possibly wouldn't have if I hadn't traveled as much. I mean, just when you see things on the news that in places where you've been, there's just an emotional connection that you might have an intellectual understanding of the problem and compassion in a kind of general sense. But when you've been somewhere and you've met people who live there and then you see that they're having a natural disaster or something awful is happening, you do have that. I think the emotional connection is what, is what happens when you travel somewhere. and you've actually had your feet on the ground in that place, and you've breathed the air, and you've spoken to people, and you've shaken hands with people, and it just makes things real. I remember there was a trip I did in Cambodia a few years ago, and I went to the Genocide Museum in Phnom Penh, which is, a shocking place. You can't really go there and not be affected. But what affected me more than any of the exhibits was talking to this old man at the gate, sitting at this desk, selling copies of his book, which was about his own experiences during the reign of the Khmer Rouge. And he had been at the Genocide Museum when it was the Tuol Song prison, and he, and for him, his courage in going back there each day to sit there and to tell people what happened so that it could never happen again. That that kind of, I know, I just it really affected me. And when I went to shake his hand, he took my hand in both of his, and I just burst into tears.
I don't blame
and
you.
It was just, and it's still, that was probably, I don't know, 8 years ago, and I can still feel the emotion now when I'm telling you about it.
Yeah.
So I think that's the way travel affects us and makes us care, and I think that's really important. So in that way, I think we have to keep traveling, but I think we have to find ways that we travel, find ways to travel that are sustainable in terms of being able to travel in that way for a long time, and in a way that I guess has more of a positive impact than a negative one. And I think that's something I try to weigh up with every trip I do now. My travel has definitely decreased by choice over the last few years. I remember there were years where I was doing 10 or 11 overseas trips a year. And it was too much. You get burnt out when you're traveling a lot anyway. And I know travel writers who will do more than that even. But last year I did 4 overseas trips, and that still worked in terms of making a living. I just write more stories from each trip, and I try to stay longer. And but I think just trying to, I'm just trying to find the sweet spot between my concern for the planet and my sense of, I guess, responsibility. I guess there's that old thing about, privilege comes with responsibility. And I do feel that my travel writing job is a privilege in lots of ways. I work hard for it, like everyone else who works in travel media. But it does have that responsibility that we can't just pretend that we're immune to the laws of nature and climate change, and that the obligations don't apply to us just because we earn our living from travel. I think we're even more obligated in a way, because not only are we traveling more than most people, but we're promoting travel.
Exactly. Yeah. You're encouraging other people to travel. So
exactly.
You have to be mindful about how and what kind of travel you're encouraging.
How you travel yourself, and also what kinds of travel you're promoting and encouraging other people to do. So that's definitely been something that I've been thinking about for a little while now, and trying to always refine it, and always trying to balance, is this trip going to have more of a positive impact than a negative one, and how can I ameliorate the negative impact of it? And I think it does. As I said, I think each of us just has to make our own decision about that, and it's always going to change as well. It's a shifting thing. I don't think you can just make a decision and then stick to it from now on. I think there might be this whole era of climate change is like a rug moving under our feet all the time, keeping us a bit off balance. And I think we just need to adapt to it, and keep aware of what's happening, and keep up to date with the latest developments, and what impacts our travel has, which is always changing as well. So Yeah.
Yeah. I think you're right. Like, it's such a tricky question because there's the personal benefits, which are, vast. And it's not just, oh, we had a nice holiday or we had something fun happen. There's significant personal, benefits to your whole, personal development, which can impact other things you do in the world in a positive way. So it's not just as simple as that, but it's also, so you can't just, it's such a tricky question. And I, really grapple with it myself. But I think the point you make about it's an ongoing decision that you just have to keep working on to fit your values and to fit kind of the information and the technology that you have at that time. Like, at the moment I might think that going on a big cruise liner is not a great, because it's not, probably not very sustainable and all of that. But who knows, in 10 years, the technology might be so different that I might think completely otherwise. Who knows? Things
that's a really
change
good point.
so quickly.
Yeah.
So it's kind of trying to keep on top of things and do your research and find out, how can you balance it?
Yes. And I think what you said about the personal benefits rippling out, I kind of think about this a lot as well, because it's like taking up meditation or something else that's enriching your own life. I think a lot of people might think it's self-indulgent or selfish to put time into that, but it's actually helping. The benefits do ripple out from you, and the more we enrich ourselves and grow as people, as individuals, then hopefully, that makes the world a better place, because we're not going to be carrying the stuff that makes us all, butt up against each other and cause problems and conflicts. And
it's so true. That's a good example. Yeah. I know if I'm meditating regularly, I'm a much kinder mother, I'm a much better friend, I'm a much better teacher, so there's a lot of benefits to everyone else. So I think,
that's right.
The same applies to the things that we can get out of travel. I mean, that's kind of partly why I go on and on about thoughtful travel, is that if we can travel in a more thoughtful way, then that means that we, kind of maximize the benefits of it for ourselves and for the rest of the world. I hope.
That's right. And there is, exactly. That's really well said. And I think I've thought about this now that I'm traveling a bit less. I think when I started turning down the dial on travel, I really missed that kind of part of me that was really familiar with travel. And I was trying to tease out, what did I miss about traveling? And I realized that there are all these qualities that have grown in a traveling context that I can still apply in my daily life. But I guess things that I learn on the road that, I don't know, I guess maybe the lessons stick with you more, or they're just more vivid because you're in Mongolia, or you're in Berlin, or you're in Iceland or somewhere, and you're maybe it's just that you're paying attention more. I guess that's one thing.
And you're away from all the rest of your normal life. You're away from all those other distractions and stresses and all of that. So you're kind of really open to learning things and changing things, I think.
And I think I often feel like I'm actually more patient and kinder and more compassionate and more thoughtful when I'm away than when I'm trying to make a living and make everything work at home.
Yes.
And I kind of think those regular, and I guess that's one thing that justifies travel in my mind sometimes, is that going away is like a circuit breaker where you stop worrying about all those life maintenance issues and things that kind of can weigh you down when you're at home. And you can kind of, for a time, be free of that and not necessarily think higher thoughts, because sometimes it's thinking
thoughts.
more grounded thoughts, where you just want to live more simply and you just want to be kinder, and you just realize that things like love and connection is what really matters, not all the other stuff that we spend all our time thinking and doing things about. So that's, I guess, that kind of circuit breaker aspect of travel is what I really love about it.
Lots of food for thought there. I think one of my favorite things that Lou talks about is how travel is a circuit breaker. And that's something I really believe. I really think there are some experiences and some learnings that you just can't have like in the same way by staying home. I think, I don't know, am I just justifying it because I really want to keep traveling? I think maybe, but I really think there's some things that it isn't the same unless you are in a foreign place and away from home. And then all sorts of things can happen. Lots of magic happens. Anyway, as I mentioned, my second guest today is Catherine Marshall. Catherine and I spoke more recently after COVID-19 has grounded us all. And Catherine does mention that because, as she and I both think, hopefully this period of no travel will help us, or more of us, consider this whole question about justifying travel once we are able to travel again.
Look, this is a really tricky one, and I don't have an answer. We want to travel. Obviously, that's why we're chatting today. We both travel for a living, but we're also acutely aware of the problems inherent therein. And of course, the problem in actually promoting travel. We both play a huge role in that. And so there are certainly some ethical questions, I think, around that. And I think that's probably an ongoing process for us that we need to constantly stop and evaluate and consider and determine how we can be perhaps practice our profession in a more responsible manner. I mean, having said that, I think this coronavirus lockdown is going to give us pause for thought with regard to not only how we spend our time and how we travel in relation to our leisure time, but also in relation to climate change, of course. We've all seen the images showing less pollution, showing, wild animals roaming streets and that type of thing. And so I think, I don't think any of us will come out of this without being more thoughtful travelers at any rate. And so that can only be a good thing. I think for me personally, especially with vlugskam, flight shame, spearheaded by Greta Thunberg, I've been thinking about this for quite a long time. So the coronavirus has only intensified those thoughts. But that whole campaign, that vlugskam campaign, has helped me to formulate the way I travel. I don't think I've made any major changes, but I certainly try to dovetail trips so that I'm not only doing one thing for, taking one long-haul flight for a week's worth of travel. I mean, I have certainly done that, but the aim for me is to think more carefully about how I plan my trips, and to maximize each trip, and then with each trip to travel more in a more environmentally sustainable way. So to use more train travel, and that type of thing.
Why do you travel? Why do you need to travel?
I mean, it's an interesting question that I just have an insatiable curiosity about the world. And I've always wanted to travel from a young age. I grew up in South Africa. We traveled from Johannesburg to Durban or the South Coast or Cape Town on holidays. You might go to some of the neighboring countries, but I certainly didn't grow up in a culture where we didn't travel overseas. And not many people I knew did travel overseas. However, my father traveled a lot. What I mean is people I knew didn't really travel overseas on holiday the way we do today. That wasn't a thing. You would travel locally inside your own country, or as I say, perhaps in some of the neighboring countries. But my father traveled a lot for work, and he traveled to some very remote and interesting places. And we would go and drop him off at the airport, and we would, they had it was called Jan Smuts Airport at that stage. It's now OR Tambo in Joburg. We lived quite close to the airport, and we would go and drop him off, and they had a little balcony, an open air balcony overlooking the runway. And we would wait there until my father walked out on the tarmac to the waiting aircraft, and we would wave at him. And that sense, every time I saw a plane taking off or, coming into land, it just spoke to me. It was a symbol of a bigger world that existed out there. And I wanted to know what that world was, and I wanted to see it. So that's how it started. And I think it was less about the people who inhabited that world. But of course, for me, that's what it's become, is the people who inhabit that world, because I am very curious about people and culture and that type of thing. So I also mentally view the world as, for me, it's like a puzzle.
Mm.
And each country that you've visited or each place that you've seen is a piece of that puzzle that you can slot into place. And so it becomes, the world comes into better focus the more pieces of that puzzle have been slotted into place.
That is genius. That's so true. I've never thought of it that way. But the more pieces that you have, the more things begin to make sense, and the more you understand why certain things are the way they are and why people act the way they act.
History makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Religion makes sense, better sense. Culture, the way the world has shaped itself through migration and wars and conflicts and that type of thing. Everything starts to make sense when you start slotting those pieces into place.
Yeah. That's beautifully put. Wow, that's excellent. What about, so there's a benefit of having those pieces in place, or, what are the benefits to you and to the rest of us of traveling beyond understanding better?
Look, I think it's a largely selfish benefit. I don't need to travel. I can travel in my own city and visit many different countries. I can go to Italy in Leichhardt.
Mm-hmm.
I can go to the Middle East, to Lebanon, for example, or Iran. There are ways of traveling. We live in a very multicultural society, so we have access to people and food and stories within our own cities generally, for most of us. So it is, I would say it's primarily a selfish instinct. But of course it does enhance, I suppose, the way you perceive people, the way you see the world. I like to think travel makes us better human beings. I wrote something recently about travel being a great vehicle for peace.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's been some study to show that travel, people have thought in the past that travel makes for a more peaceful world. But actually there's been some study to suggest that countries that are more peaceful are better developed for travel and for tourism, which of course makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I do like to think that as travelers, we're ambassadors for our own countries, and that we're opening up lines of communication.
Mm-hmm.
And I must say something that I've often thought, I've thought a lot about this, and I haven't written about it yet, but it's something that I do want to write about. And that is, and I'm sure, Amanda, you've experienced this as well. We are really privileged. We are well traveled. We see a lot of places. We meet a lot of people. And we're meeting a lot of people who have never left their own countries or have never left their own towns in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
And I often wonder what our role is in relation to these people. In a sense, it sounds a bit arrogant, but in a sense, we're bringing a world, or we're bringing our world at any rate to them. And we need to think really responsibly about how we do that.
So true.
You know, I think a lot of people, so for me, when I travel, I try to travel responsibly. I feel that I am a guest in other people's countries and I need to respect them and to learn from them. I'm there to do that. I think what troubles me a bit in terms of travel and the rate at which we travel today is the notion that people are ticking places off a list. Mm-hmm. And so I've met a number of people who are on a quest to visit every single country in the world and to do it as quickly as they possibly can. And I think if this is the motivation for travel, then it is problematic and we can't really justify it, especially in this age of climate change.
Yeah.
But if you have a more noble motivation, where you're going to meet people where they're at, to spend time with them, to immerse yourself in their culture and try to make yourself a better person in as much as you are understanding them and their world and the greater world and where they fit into it and where you fit into it vis-a-vis them, then I think we can justify it, and we will always be travelers. Human beings are, by their very nature, adventurous, and we have. I think the impetus to move is part of our DNA, so we'll never get rid of that. But certainly, climate change means we need to think more carefully about how we do it.
So many good thoughts there. It's hard for me to pick a favourite, but I think Catherine saying that I like to think travel makes us better human beings is something I can fully support. It's one of my very big motivations for travelling, and maybe it's selfish, but I think if we're better human beings, that probably helps a lot of the people around us too, doesn't it? Anyway, lots and lots to unpack and think about there. Come over and have a chat about it in the Facebook group for Thoughtful Travellers. There's a link in the show notes, or just search for Thoughtful Travellers in Facebook and you'll find us there. We're always having interesting chats, and I hope that this episode sparks a good conversation. I'm sure it will. I've been really thrilled to be able to have these amazing thoughts from these fabulous women today to share with you all. It gave me such a thrill to kind of be putting this episode together and really listening back to these great conversations. So thank you so much, very, very much, to Lou and Catherine for this episode. You can find more about Louise Southerden at her website, No Impact Girl, which is at noimpactgirl.com. Catherine has a website coming very soon at catherinemarshall.com.au. In the meantime, if that's not quite up, then you can also find more work from Catherine and friends at their website, Time to Wander, which is at timetowander.com.au. These links and more will be in the show notes. The show notes for this episode are at notaballerina.com/183. I hope you enjoyed this episode even half as much as I did, and thank you very, very much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.